All right. So, um, my name is Patrick Jones. I'm an aerospace engineering major, and as with my major, I decided to present on the Boeing 737 Max and all the ethics surrounding it. So, kind of throughout this presentation, we're going to hit kind of the background of kind of what started the Boeing 737 Max, and then kind of taking what it is into how it was made and basically what it was meant to be, and then how it ultimately, as we saw in the news, did not live up to those design specifications, and then cost benefit analysis and a conclusion, kind of just looking at how the ethics of this situation can be applied to the aerospace industry as a whole. So kind of just to start, the Boeing 737 Max is a commercial jet. It basically, that's what Boeing is known for putting out. They do a plethora of aerospace things, but they specialize within the commercial jet industry. This specific model is the next installation of the 737 family. So basically, the 737 family is like known as like the workhorse of their fleet, kind of since the beginning, or since the 737s were put out for the very first time in their first model. They've been continually bought and used very frequently. More than likely, if you've ever ridden on a Boeing on a flight across the country, it's probably been some model of a 737. And basically, this one specifically was made to rival Airbus. Airbus is the main competitor for Boeing. And in recent years, Airbus has kind of come up next to them and almost passed them in a lot of ways, which them passing them is a lot due to this situation specifically. So kind of the timeline. So basically leading up to 2010, Boeing was had changed in culture when they were bought in the 90s by McDonnell Douglas. There was a shift from quality engineering, making good products, to doing more of how can we make the most profit? How can we put out the most aircraft possible? And from a corporate side of things, this sounds great, but they ended up taking a lot of the engineering out of it, which is what allowed Airbus, who kind of kept that approach, to come up and meet them at the plate. So basically, when they announced this new family, Boeing was at a point where they were very concerned whether or not they could keep up. And as you can see, literally like about 6 months later or 8 months later, they announced a new model as well, and put it into service about as quick as you can put a commercial jet into service, as we'll get into here in a little bit. Then October, about a little bit over a year of it being in service, had the first crash. This crash was in the, I guess, body of water next to Indonesia. I honestly completely forgot what that's called, but basically was complete nose down right into the water. And literally just a few months later, Ethiopian Airlines, the same thing happened out in the desert. So basically, the FAA saw this, grounded the MAX, and production was halted. And then ultimately, Boeing's CEO was fired. So the design of the 737 MAX was really just meant to be minor upgrades from the previous model. Basically, like whenever you create a new aircraft, you have to do completely new certifications. And the goal was to minimize how many certifications you would have to get, as well as if you didn't create a whole new aircraft, if you were just upgrading this one, then you wouldn't have to teach pilots how to fly it, which is another major expense that these companies have to take. And then the main thing that is called into question in this case is the MCAS system. So this is kind of an overview of what they did with this new model. As you can see, it's kind of some smaller things like on the tail cone winglets, quieter, nothing super significant, except for the engines there where they were significantly larger and could output a lot more thrust. So therefore they had to be put farther up on the wing. So in doing that, the plane is naturally going to fly at a much steeper angle. So in order to combat that, they made the MCAS system, aka the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, which automatically would bring the nose back level, just to help the pilots out, especially when you're flying a new aircraft with no new training. The idea behind it was that it would just assist the pilots and not take control. However, as we would find later, it would ultimately be the result of those crashes. So the anticipated outcomes of this new design was to reestablish Boeing as the top commercial airplane provider, make higher sales and profit, minimize the costs, i.e. the minimum certifications and no new pilot training, as well as behind MCAS, it was originally supposed to increase safety, as most of the systems do, as you know, which is what does align with our engineering ethics. However, the dilemma was that MCAS itself was poorly carried out. It had no fail-safe, meaning that if it was to malfunction, there was nothing that would back it up. So if a balloon had hit it or if a bird had just knocked it off, like it would have failed. And basically a failure of the MCAS system means that the plane will immediately enter a nosedive, which is what caused the two crashes. MCAS was withheld from pilots in the FAA in order to minimize these certifications and make sure that Boeing could get by without having to, I guess, create any more training of any kind. And Boeing also rejected concern for this system as well as a better safety system. And as a whole, Boeing suppressed the issue. This wasn't really like publicized very heavily until they were grounded as a whole. And they had suppressed employees and they really just wouldn't take the blame. They blamed the pilots. They said they were inexperienced. They found every way to spin it where it wasn't on them. And that's not ultimately ethically sound because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you know it's your system that's failing, you kind of just got to own up to it. So the consequences of these poor ethics was obviously the two crashes that happened within a 4-month span, the grounding of the entire fleet, and then the damaged reputation for Boeing because they did this in an effort to surpass Airbus, and if anything, made Airbus just look even better. So kind of doing a cost-benefit analysis of this one. It's pretty simple. It's mostly just cost. There was none of the anticipated outcomes were achieved. If anything, they just gained major consequences, and it was all due to poor engineering ethics. If they had carried out the MCAS system correctly, I think that it could have gone very well. Maybe in having 2 sensors and having some sort of backup system. However, in order to minimize the amount of time to put it out as quick as they could and the cost, they ended up just avoiding all that and fast tracking it at almost a ridiculous rate. So kind of the conclusion that we can take from this is in looking at the aerospace engineering industry as a whole, like with the shift of the focus on the stock market and some of the more corporate executives knowing less about engineering, but knowing more about the business side of things, there's this kind of newfound rush to decrease the quality and safety to maximize profit. And this case is a great example of why we can't necessarily let that take over and that mindset. And if we look at this situation specifically, if Boeing had used proper ethics in the way they made the MCAS system and the way they responded to it, it could have looked a lot different. If they had listened to their company, maybe they could have prevented the second crash or both of them as a whole. So basically the overarching thing is poor ethics can have major consequences. So, and thank you for your time. And if you have any questions.
Would you say that it's like kind of proves the fact that as an engineering major, you should have to take business classes and stuff like that.
I would say so. I mean, personally, like, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm interested more in like, especially the business side of engineering. But like, I think if you kind of know what's going on, like on that side of the industry, you can do your job well or better, as well as kind of vice versa. Like if they're working on that side of the industry, they know how to provide you the best resources to do that as well. Anything else?
Just real quick about the MCAS system. So
Yeah.
did they, what was it specifically that they withheld? Just that the MCAS system was like a thing, or was, so they didn't tell them about it at
No,
all?
it was not communicated whatsoever.
Oh, I didn't know. that.
Yeah,
That's
so basically
insane.
yeah,
Yeah.
you know, like in a new car, you know, you'd like sit down, or you know how to drive a car. So you sit down in a like 2005, you know, and it's going to be kind of older. And then you sit down in a 2019, like it's just going to feel better, you know, and it's going to look nicer. And that was kind of the goal, was just to like make a plane that could drive the or fly the same, if not obviously a little bit better with the engines. But at the end of the day, like not really affect how the pilots flew it. But then you notice there's these two big wheels, like wheel looking things in the cockpit, and it's not described. When I was researching this, I actually looked up, I think they had about 10 seconds to turn it off if it had failed and started initiating. So like, say you're never communicated that this is even a thing, and then the system initiates, like how are you supposed to know how to turn that off?
Right, that's insane.
So
It's
That's
like
crazy.
that's like a way worse version of like not knowing that your truck has like lane assist.
yeah. So I mean, and the crazy thing is most people don't know that like that was like not really presented. And I don't know, when I like did research on this, I definitely lost some respect for Boeing in some ways. I just don't really know how you let that happen. But yeah.
It's like a super fatal prank.